Welcome to If Only You Knew, where each week we take a deep dive into the careers and experiences of people from different backgrounds, cultures, countries and ages to discuss pivotal moments in their lives and the lessons they have learnt along the way.
If they told people the truth, they wouldn't last very long.
Whether you're a school student in an established career, mapping your academic pathway, searching for the perfect career, looking to change careers, or just plain curious, then this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Christy McCormack, and I want to ask you, what would you do differently if only you knew? With me today is Nicolas Chiew. Nick is a mechanical engineer with a broad range of experience across small and medium enterprise, corporate, and the not-for-profit sector. After spending 10 years working in his own business, Nick moved into the not-for-profit space where he worked for Misfit Aid, a not-for-profit focused upon sending teams of skilled individuals from the Australian community to assist in the areas of building and construction, community empowerment, and other development programs. Nick currently works as an operations director for a key national industry body that represents an $8 billion industry in Australia. Welcome, Nick, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Okay, so you have a Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering from the University of New South Wales. Did you always want to be an engineer?
It's one of those things that I kind of fell into. So during high school, I was unashamedly a maths and science nerd. And it seemed like the next step to go into. So when I was looking at courses that were available, my oldest brother was already at that same university doing an engineering degree. And so I started looking into it, and that's the degree that I chose.
So how much of a role did your high school play in your chosen university degree, or do you think there was more influence from your family given that your brother was following that path?
Yeah, listen, probably not a lot of influence from my high school. And that's, I'm not sort of saying that to detract from my high school at all. But from my position, I was already sort of in those high-level maths, physics, chemistry, engineering science courses. And it was a natural fit. And also, because my brother was at university, and he was actually in the same faculty as well that I ended up going to, it seemed like a comfortable fit.
So what do you think your main driver was for wanting to continue to complete that degree once you'd already started it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, there's an interesting thing that in my second year at university, I had this professional studies program. And one of the things the lecturer said was that within 5 years of leaving university, less than 50% of you will be working as engineers, which I found kind of interesting. But in any case, I certainly had challenges at university as well, but really I want to get through and sort of get out into the world and start actively working and doing things that I would think mattered and were sort of in line with the degree that I did.
So did you ever have thoughts of wanting to change degrees midway through?
Yeah, listen, at the end of the first year, I did sort of toy with that idea, but really none of the other degrees that were out there sort of really sat that comfortably with me. And the thing about mechanical engineering was that it's quite a broad degree. So the first 2 years of mechanical engineering are common amongst a number of other sort of streams of engineering. So if you want to do biomedical engineering, for example, you can do that by doing first two years of mechanical engineering and then specializing, or you can do it by doing a Bachelor of Medicine and then specializing. Similarly, you can go into naval architecture, manufacturing, aeronautical engineering, all these sorts of strands. So it's a really broad strand of engineering.
So what made you choose that, given there's so much opportunity and there's so many different streams of engineering and obviously all the other careers that you can take on with after doing those first 2 years? Why did you settle, well, not settle, I don't want to say it like that. Why did you decide on mechanical engineering above all else?
In the end, it was the subjects that I was choosing that came time to sort of select, or the selective subjects. It lay very much within the main stream of mechanical engineering. So where I ended up doing my more specialised subjects were in thermodynamics and fluid mechanics, which are, they're really as sexy as that sounds. And that sat really, really sort of within that main strand. But certainly I've got friends that, went into mechatronics, robotics and things like that, naval architecture, as I said, and certainly my oldest brother became an aerospace engineer.
So how hard is it to become an engineer, really? Like, how hard is it?
Yeah, listen, I think it's a tough degree. Certainly I failed a few subjects when I was at university. Part of that as well, I think, is that if I'm honest, when you get to university, even if you've taken a gap year, particularly if you're a male, you're still a kid. You're still learning what it means to sort of be responsible. And so, a big part of my engineering time was struggling through some of the really complex subjects, and also having a social life outside of the normal living at home or going to school sort of a scenario. It's a tough degree in the sense that some of the subjects have very high failure rates. So some of the subjects that I was in had 70% failure rates. And I was certainly a statistic for a few of those. And also the other thing is that to have your degree recognised by the Institute of Engineers Australia, you have to do a thesis. And that thesis is it's up to you. It's a topic that you either select through an academic mentor, or you get an industry-sponsored one, or you put in a submission to have your own thesis topic, and that's a year's worth of work on your own with guidance from a supervisor. But it's all on you, so it's a pretty interesting time.
So how much guidance do you actually get through that thesis year?
Depends on your mentor. There are some fantastic academic mentors out there, and there's some really smart people at universities that are probably not that well suited to mentoring. So for me, no disrespect to my mentor, but quite often my weekly meeting with him would start off with, yes, good to see you, Nick. Now, what thesis are you doing again? You could never. And he had a lot of projects that he was running himself. He was involved in a lot of papers. Very well respected academic. But it was one of those things that a lot was sort of left in my court to sort of drive through that thesis and sort of work it through to its completion.
So maybe they're a little bit stretched for resources with the university to be able to really support through those.
Yeah, it's also probably a difference in the sense that when you're in a high school scenario, regardless of which high school you go to, there's a degree of the high school teachers stepping you through a curriculum and saying, and taking, actively looking at, have you done your homework, for example. In university, I don't care. You haven't done your homework. Well, you haven't done your assignment or handed in on time. That's fine. You don't get a mark. It's no skin off my nose. So it's a very different scenario there as well, because I expect you to be able to work as adults, work autonomously as well. Certainly there's guidance available, but you're not going to have your academic mentor calling up your parents to arrange a parent-teacher interview, put it that way.
So as a young man, did you find it difficult to reach out to those resources within the university to sort of ask for help and guidance throughout your degree?
Probably a little bit, and that was more so my personality at the time as well. You grow through life, and certainly when I went into university, personal confidence levels, for example, I wasn't as comfortable in my own skin as I am now, for example, and I was a little bit more shy and standoffish. So I had to learn to be able to step outside of my comfort zone and ask for help. And there were a few times where I needed to do that, and it was actually a tough process at the time, but all good learning experiences.
So I did want to talk to you a little bit about what skill sets that you feel are required both academically and personally within the engineering field.
Within the university environment, so going through that study program, obviously having a degree of skill or an intellect in terms of mathematics and science-based fields is really, really helpful. And in terms of completing the degree, I think there's you have to learn resilience and you have to learn how to work autonomously. One of the biggest skill sets that I feel I got out of doing my degree, even though I don't use my degree anymore, is that it taught me how to research independently, develop plans independently, and execute those plans.
So I find most engineers to be quite balanced and level-headed, and they're able to sort of give and receive constructive criticism in a really positive sort of way. And I don't think you're any exception to that. So is that something that they teach you, or do you think that that's something that comes with having those skill sets to be suited to that sort of field?
Listen, it wasn't something that was taught at all. And as I sort of think about it, maybe there's a degree of because you are doing subjects which are quite complex, and you're not going to get them right the first time every time, regardless of how well you take notes in lectures. It means that you really have to be able to listen and take on board advice and correction. And if you can't take it on board, then you're gonna fail that subject, and you might fail it multiple times. So if I had a theory around why that's so. I'd sort of be leaning more towards that you need to be able to take direction to be able to get through the courses.
Because I think they're really good transferable skills, but do you have any advice for people to be able to develop those sort of soft skills?
It's something that I've seen in the workforce now. The requirement for those soft skills are really, really highly valued. I think part of it does come with time. Certainly when I came out of university, I didn't have the same sort of emotional intelligence or soft skills that I do later on in my career. Certainly there's training that you can do to develop those skill sets. And as you'd be aware through some of our common contacts, there are people that provide those sorts of skills, and I really value those sorts of courses. I would say that part of it is time, but part of that is making sure that you're open to the experiences that you're going through, and also being able to look and reflect on things in a sort of a non-judgmental way. Otherwise, if you get your back up about feedback that's given, it's going to be a bumpy ride, that's for sure.
Now, reality doesn't always meet expectations. So the expectation that you had when you entered university to the reality that you walked away from the university experience with, how different were they?
Yeah, that's a pretty big difference. Really, I didn't know what to expect in terms of doing the degree and then what it would look like outside of it. Once I was in the mix, you definitely got a good feel for it, and you could see people in higher years or finishing the degrees and going into certain jobs and roles and things like that. But there was a good degree of difference. As I said before, that there's a different environment in the high school system in terms of teachers taking an active interest in making sure you're doing your work, for example. Certainly in that university environment, very, very different.
So I've spoken a lot, to a lot of people about, sort of entering university and what they want to do when they sort of start. And a lot of them don't really know what the degree is going to give them. So do you think that universities could perhaps do more to explain what the real world will be like once you actually complete the degree?
I think they can, but, I think also that they're already starting to do that. And the only reason I say that is I was reminiscing a little while ago. I was just sort of checking out the faculty page of my university and sort of seeing what some of my colleagues were doing as well. And I think there's more resources available now that sort of show what a degree can look like in terms of student life and then after graduation. But it's still it's one of those things that unless you're living it, you don't have the feel for it. You don't feel the pressures, and you don't feel the successes unless you're actually living through those things. So experience is a big part of that process, and they can't just transfer that experience magically via a nifty video asset or something like that.
Did you find that your network within your university degree, so the people that you sort of went through your cohort, I suppose, you find them integral to you being able to complete it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those. So number one, we had a lot of sort of group project work in terms of larger design projects, which we'd be involved in. Certainly at my university, one of the big ones was the solar car racing challenge, which involved multiple engineering faculties. So they form a big part of it. But also just in terms of junior assignments, junior tutorials, having access to people in higher years that have gone through that subject, and also people that, just your colleagues within your cohort, to go to them and say, "Oh, I'm having trouble with this one. How did you approach it?" That formed a really big part of day-to-day student life.
If you had one piece of advice for a young person about to start a university degree, what would that be?
I would say, and that's a good question. What I would say is that you've got to understand that when you're going into university, that it's a time for you to learn, and it's also a time for you to learn academically, but also socially. It's really important probably to get that balance right. Don't go there and just party all the time. You're going to miss out on a great education. Likewise, if your head is, if you're stuck in the books all the time, or stuck in your computer labs or whatever it may be all the time, you're missing out on human interactions. And those human interactions are really, really important later in life.
So you've got to have a real balance, I suppose, with like you do later in life.
Yeah, absolutely. And, listen, when I was at university, I went both ways. I do remember going to the odd lecture in the morning with a slightly fuzzy head. I also remember, working all night on multiple occasions to get stuff done. So you've got to balance it out.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you're not currently utilising your degree. I'd probably argue a little bit with you on that, you're still being able to use it. But anyway, you came out of university and you worked as a project engineer for around 5 years before you started your own company. So could you tell us a little bit about what a project engineer does and what your daily routine looked like at that point in your life?
I was involved as a project engineer in the consulting side of things. So it was really just design work. Wasn't actually involved with physical installations, even though I'd go and visit them. I was in the building services sector, which was everything that makes a building work. So industrial air conditioning, ventilation, lift services, electrical services, hydraulic services, all that sort of stuff. And where I worked specifically was mostly in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And some of my projects. So when I first came out of university, I worked for a small boutique agent consulting firm, and I managed the national design template for McDonald's Australia for their stores nationwide from the electrical and mechanical services perspective, and got involved with a lot of projects. I think I probably was involved with about 250 McDonald's stores, which is high volume, and maybe I shouldn't be too proud of it, but in any case, there's a lot of work there. And then I worked for a multinational engineering firm with about 5,000 employees, and I was involved with some stuff with Stadium Australia. Guys on my team were involved with the Wembley Stadium reproduction, Dublin Light Rail, a really big building, construction and infrastructure projects. So on a day-to-day basis, it would typically start off with a project, starting off doing design work, a lot of time with drawings and marking up drawings, through to tender processes, then going onto site, doing defect inspections, things like that, and then final sign-off on projects. Given the project, it could be going for 3 or 4 years, or it could be a 6-month project. So they were pretty varied.
Yeah, so you worked across many projects. So do you think it's important to get a diverse range of experience straight out of university?
I think so. Yeah, as much as you can, try and get involved with different projects, because once again, it comes back to, do you really know what life as an engineer or life as anyone else is going to look like? And I'm a big believer that the best way to really understand that is to experience it in real life. So get involved with interesting projects. Get involved outside of the project as well. So one of the things I did was I joined the graduate leadership programs. I was voted onto the graduate board for that. I got involved with Toastmasters just to sort of try and develop my presentation skills. Do everything that you can to give yourself more experience.
So you really put yourself out there then to improve, I suppose, your position and your learnings.
Yeah. And part of it was that I had some really good managers when I came out of university as well. So my first manager, he was the owner of the consulting company. He loved cars. He became an engineer because he wanted to build race cars, and ended up doing air conditioning and that sort of stuff. But a really lovely guy that gave a lot of great advice. And I actually remember the day that I had to resign from that role. I was really emotional about it because I knew that I couldn't stay there, but I'd gotten so much out of working with that guy. And then the manager that I had at Sinclair Knight Merz, he was a really sort of commercially minded guy, quite charismatic. He was really telling one day, he was talking to me, and he was talking about someone else that was in the team. And his advice was that he wanted to do the best thing by that person, period. Not so much as their role within the company. Certainly wanted to have them perform their role well, but he wanted them to have the best possible career that they could. So sometimes his advice to her was, you need to look at a role somewhere else, not because you're performing badly, because you need to grow now, and there's not that role for you where you currently are. So I was very fortunate to have some great managers, when I was working as an engineer.
So do you think those managers have influenced the way that you've managed staff over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've had similar sorts of discussions with my staff. So when I had my company, I had a number of EAs that worked for me, and it got to a point with some of them that I said, listen, you're really good at what you do, but I can't give you a hell of a lot more experience in this current role. I'm really supportive of you to look for another role, and I'll do everything I can to support that. And okay, I wasn't giving her notice or anything like that. She wasn't getting fired. Quite opposite. But it took her probably about 4 or 5 months to sort of act on that. And now she's the EA for one of the C-suite at Lend-Lease. She has a great career, and she's we still sort of chat virtually every now and then. But there's real value in having a relationship, treating people well, and knowing that if you ever need to call upon them, they will respond because you've had that authentic, honest relationship with them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's really good, and I think leaders definitely influence you. If you have good ones, you have good experiences, and you transfer those skills to who you lead. But if you have bad ones, then more than likely you're going to be a bad boss type thing.
Yeah. Listen, I was involved with some projects as a young engineer where there was a construction project manager who was an old school style project manager, and by that I mean that they would kick heads. That's what they would do to get the job done. They would jump on the phone, yell and scream, and try and get things done. Now, did they get the projects done? Absolutely. But if push came to shove and they were in need of a hand to get themselves out of a sticky situation, people are less inclined to put their hand up and help you out if you've treated them in a certain way. So it goes a long way to treating people with respect. Doesn't mean you can't disagree with them. Absolutely, it's healthy to disagree. But treating people with respect and treating them honestly and fairly goes a long way.
Now, you worked for some good companies and obviously you had some good leaders, but then you went on to start your own company, Aventra, and ran it for almost 10 years. So can you tell us a little bit about that company?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was funnily enough, I was working as an engineer and I made the decision to leave engineering. And for me, it was actually quite a stark sort of a decision in the sense that I'd been pulled onto a project which was failing, and I'd be asked to work on it and not put my hours against it, and really sort of take a battering for it. And I did that. I was happy to do it, but at the end of it, it was sort of not really recognised, and I sort of became aware that I really wanted to explore my own sort of autonomy and building my career the way that I want to do it. And so, as an engineer, I'd worked. There was a degree of exposure with telecommunications in doing my engineering work, and so there was an opportunity that arose to start up a telecommunications consulting company, and I went down that pathway. And I did that with my first wife, who was involved in sales in telecommunications. And what we sort of found was that this is going back quite a few years, obviously, but it was when mobiles had been deregulated. You could transfer numbers between carriers and things like that. But one of the things we found was that small to medium-sized businesses had similar requirements to enterprise-sized businesses. However, the carriers weren't set up to really manage that. They were focusing on the big end of town or on the transactional consumer sort of market. And so where we sat as that middleman for those sorts of companies that needed extra help with their telecommunications, but couldn't get it. That they'd be farmed off to an offshore call center or something like that. And that's really where that business sort of started off and went from there.
So what sort of link do you think that there is between mechanical engineering and telecommunications?
So ostensibly not a lot on face value in terms of technology. As I said, I did get involved with the electrical and telecommunications work. I was involved with a number of data center designs as well as an engineer. But more than anything, one of the successes that we had with Aventra was in project management, because in those days to move your landline numbers from, say, a Telstra to an Optus, it was actually quite a lengthy process because there was infrastructure involved that was owned by Telstra, there was infrastructure that was owned by Optus. You wanted to cut over those services so that people didn't lose business functionality. So there was a degree of project management involved there, and that was where you could really sort of define that when a lot of the other similar companies were sort of battling to do that. They'll be very reactive, whereas we sort of plan out that whole process and measure against each of those milestones. as you said, you could argue with me that I no longer use, when I say I no longer use my engineering degree, I use the skills that I learned in engineering. Absolutely. I just don't do a lot of thermodynamics anymore. So
now, when you exited that business,
yeah,
what was the sort of reasons around it, and was it a difficult decision to sort of walk away from something that you'd put, a decade of your life into?
Yeah, yes and no, and I think when we were talking before, Christy, I sort of mentioned, you're going to get the warts and all responses from me. So I'm going to give you the warts and all response around that. There was a number of things that play there. One of the things was I was going through a marriage breakdown as well, and my wife at the time had not been working for probably about 2 or 3 years, and was having some mental health issues at the time as well. And in the end, we had been talking about exit strategies for a period of time, and we'd explored a few. But when push came to shove, we needed to exit that process. So I was separated as well at that point. And for me, the idea of just continuing to soldier on was not going to be healthy for me from a physical or mental perspective. I'd sort of courted a number of people, and we had some offers on the table. And as it turned out, the majority of our business, probably about 70% of it, came through Optus, and the remainder through other providers. And as it happened, Optus said, "Well, we'd like to take on board your customer base again." And
Wow.
so in the end, it was essentially it was a virtual sale back to Optus, and it was a really tough decision to come to that. When I made the announcement to our staff, it was really emotional. It really was, and there's a lot of emotion from our staff as well, because it wasn't that they were losing a job, and I made big effort to make sure that each of them had jobs to go to, and probably within the space of a week they all had a job to go to. But it was emotional for them as well, because they had no idea that I was going through a major breakdown at the time and everything like that. And there was a few tears that were shed along the way, but we made sure that we did the right thing, and we also made sure that we celebrated it as well. So we put on a final big dinner for all of our staff. We went out and went to a great restaurant and had a good meal and a few drinks. And I can still call on, and I still do contact. I still do get in contact with a lot of those people that used to work for me.
So you sound like you looked after everybody that worked for you really well, which is absolutely lovely from an employer perspective. But how did you look after yourself? You were going through a marriage breakdown.
Yeah.
How did you take care of your own mental well-being?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because essentially I went into the aid world as a mechanism to take care of myself mentally as well. So within the space of 12 months, I went through a sale of a house, a divorce process, and also sale of a business. And they say that the most stressful things you can do is buy, sell a house, sell a business, and go through a divorce. I was certainly efficient getting that done in 12 months. But and it was amicable as well. It was one of those things that I didn't want bad blood in terms of everything that we went through. However, I came out of it quite bruised. So I did a few things. One of the things I did was I volunteered for a research project in Sumatra looking at orangutans. So I spent a number of weeks in very sort of virgin rainforest areas, getting leeches attached to me, but looking for orangutans in the jungle, and it was quite interesting actually, because I spent Valentine's Day, my first Valentine's Day, as a separated husband in the jungle, and every other participant on the research project was actually female. So nothing.
You were their Valentine.
Yeah, it was easy pickings for them. But no, I did a research project which I really enjoyed, and then I looked at volunteering for an aid organisation who I knew the CEO of, and we were sitting down having a coffee, and I was really interested in volunteering for a trip. We started talking, and it sort of came to pass that he said, "Well, do you want to come in and give us a hand getting this all organised?" So part of that healing process was getting involved with aid organisations and for-purpose organisations. And then there was probably the other cliched things, around divorcees running around drinking too much and all that sort of stuff, which I did, but yeah, that was really sort of, yeah, I came out of it quite bruised, and it took a number of years of working to sort of come back to the degree of normalcy. It was a bumpy ride, that's for sure.
Do you think that sort of changed the trajectory of your career? Because obviously you went sort of towards that aid sort of work and the doing good, I suppose.
Yeah.
So how much of an influence did that part of your life make on your future career and the decisions that you make even to this day?
Yeah, when I take a step back, where you go in your career is probably a sum of a number of things. And I think my engineering experience played a part, my business experience in the for-profit sector played a part, and certainly my exposure to non-for-profit has been that other pillar in terms of how it's shaped my career path. So it was really significant. There's some challenges working in the not-for-profit sector, but there's also a lot of rewards as well. And you would know that going through the COVID-19 pandemic over the last few months has been a tough time for the industries that we're involved with. And this time has also been an intense time within the roles that I play with the non-profit organisations. But it's also been rewarding in the sense that sometimes it's hard to see how you're making a difference or what value you can offer. And when you're going through those really tough times, it's actually a unique opportunity to show how you can make a difference, what the difference is in terms of your organisation versus other organisations. And that extends to for-profit businesses. Some of the most loyal customers that I had in the telecommunications sector were born out of really bad situations where something went wrong and you had to go to that customer and you had to say, this is not good news, but here's how we can help. And that's what builds value in your relationships. When the sun's shining, the birds are singing, and you give them an extra $5 for a coffee to meet up and have a coffee, that's kind of nice. Doesn't make a big difference though. But if they're hard up against the wall and you put your blood, sweat and tears into getting them back from that precipice, that means a hell of a lot more.
What do you think is the biggest difference between not-for-profit and for-profit sectors?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So sitting on both sides of that equation, not-for-profit is for a purpose, but there's a real driving purpose behind what you're doing. The other thing that still remains is there is a fiduciary requirement, there is a legal requirement to take care of the operations of that organisation. I think sometimes where non-for-profits can struggle is to apply for-profit principles in good faith. The other challenges that you do have sometimes, particularly with aid organisations, was that you can have people that are volunteering, and it's much harder to manage someone who's volunteering their time free of charge versus someone who is in a paid for-profit role who has KPIs against that. Nevertheless, you still need to be able to function effectively. So I think the big challenges and the gaps between for-profit and not-for-profit is the levers that you have to pull to get the outputs that you want. For where I sit in industry organisations, so not charities, but non-for-profit entities, you would know, Christy, we have a significant board that we report to, which is no different from for-profit. But each member of that board volunteers their time, and people make sacrifices to be on that board. And they do a fantastic job of doing that. But it's kind of different to a corporate board, which you traditionally have remuneration against it, and you'd also have a really big, you'd have a diversity of talent that's on there. Now, we certainly still have that, but it's harder to recruit for that diversity of talent at a board level because you're asking for volunteers, and that can be a challenge. Yeah.
So do you think you have to change your mindset to be working in the different sectors?
Yeah, listen, I think there is absolute value in applying for-profit principles in the not-for-profit sector. And that's nothing that's terribly groundbreaking at all. That's not that's not some epiphany. But I think sometimes it's a tougher thing to achieve. you do need different mindsets to a certain degree. But what's interesting is you're seeing more and more corporate enterprises really tying themselves back to what they do ethically and what they do as corporate citizens. So you're seeing things like registered B corporations, so registered B corps. Some things they have to sort of adhere to is that they pay fair or above market rates for the people that work for them, so that they don't take advantage for the people that work for them. That they need to be shown to be have human resources systems which take care of their employees, and that they should be able to demonstrate the work that they do and how it positively affects their communities or their environments. So you are seeing a lot more of that now in smaller startup commercial undertakings, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, I think a lot of the smaller organisations, they definitely want to be, do good, whereas the larger corporations probably have to be good corporate citizens, but it's, it's much more difficult to do that. And also there's a lot of challenges with doing that. So what's the one thing that you think that for-profits could take from the not-for-profit sector?
Oh, that's a challenging one. But what I'd probably say is that they should look at the advantages of having a strong purpose, which everyone works towards. And that's a bit airy-fairy, I get that. Because, most companies will have a mission statement, all those sorts of things. But at the core, I think if the for-profit sector can sort of understand, really distill what they do and articulate it in such a way that they have a purpose around what they're doing, and each of the people understand that purpose, and each of the people working at that company can be held accountable to, are we contributing to achieving that purpose? I think that's something that'd be enormously positive. And there are already businesses that are doing that. Like, once again, it's no sort of epiphany around that, but there's real value in making sure that for-profits understand what their purpose is.
So do you think that you would transfer back to the for-profit sector, or are you sort of now really into the not-for-profit and that's where you think that your career will sort of
Yeah, a bit of both, to be honest, Christy. So I find my role enjoyable and satisfying in terms of what I do, but I always sort of see opportunities that are coming up. Certainly, my wife Brooke is far smarter and wonderful and beautiful. If she's watching, hello. No, there's a number of things that that we're even sort of looking at now, which is not about me taking me away from what I do on a 9 to 5 basis, but there's always an element of, like, I enjoy the process of working with people, building things that have a purpose. So we're sort of looking at a few opportunities in that as well. Nothing cemented or anything like that, but I still like to explore that entrepreneurial. I get that entrepreneurial itch every now and then, so it's good to scratch that every now and then as well.
Well, I'm excited to see what comes from that.
Yeah. Stay tuned. No, there's actually no big announcement. We're just there's actually a few interesting things that are happening right now in this weird world. People are more open to information, so there's a few things that are coming out of that, and interested to see what comes of it.
Yeah, I definitely think the COVID-19 pandemic has seen a lot of people, shift their mindset to what they want to do, they want to get out of life, how they want to spend their time. So do you think that's sort of what happened with you, or is that just always been an itch that's been there and you sort of just delved in and out of it?
Yeah, listen, it's always been there. If I go back to why I left the engineering company that I was with, part of it was that I didn't feel that I had control over my direction. Put a lot of work into something, and the satisfaction wasn't necessarily there to be seen. So it's always something I've sort of delved in and out of. I've had I've had things I've started up that haven't worked out particularly well at all, and I've come out lost some money or come out neutral. And I've had people that I talk to on ongoing basis around projects that they're doing as well, around Internet of Things and things like that. And I'm happy to sort of provide some opinions, but I get a kick out of doing that as well.
Now, Nick, I've really enjoyed speaking with you today because it's really great to have an insight into that not-for-profit sector, and especially to see someone that's hasn't travelled the straight path that a lot of the young people think they need to sort of travel, but also able to take that engineering degree and then apply the skills that you've learned throughout your different careers and jobs has been, really interesting to hear about. I just have one question for you. What would you do differently if only you knew?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one thing I would say is that what I didn't know at the time, which I think that people should know, is that the career path that you take will doubtless have branches and different sectors to it. I think gone are the days where you start off as a boilermaker and work for 45 years and retire as a boilermaker. They're pretty much gone. What will change over time is what you value. I look at what I valued when I was 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, and it's changed over time. What doesn't change, though, is the value of authentic, honest relationships and what that means, both in terms of when you're going through a good time and also when you're going through a bad time. So what I would say that if I knew this at the time, when I was 18, just first going into university, picking a career path, is that I relied on relationships to get through university. I relied on relationships to through all parts of my career. I relied on relationships when I was at my lowest, and I relied on relationships during high times as well. So be authentic, invest time in people. Don't do it for do it with honest intentions. Do it for the right reasons, but take an interest in people and be honest and authentic about it. And I can see no downside to doing that.
I completely agree. I think networks are just absolutely huge in people's lives, and I think it's probably something that's a little bit undervalued when you're younger. So I think there's been a theme throughout this podcast series is that your networks are really critical to progress both professionally and personally. Yeah. So I really thank you for taking us on your journey today.
No, thank you.
If you'd like to know more about Nick, feel free to follow him on LinkedIn, and his bio will be available on our website, ifonlyyouKnewpodcast.com.au. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Christy. Thanks so much.
For more information about our guests or our show, visit ifonlyyouKnewpodcast.com.au.